So the data told a very interesting story. It said that fear emerged as a result of climate change for young people. This fear was often as a result of ignoring the signs of climate change. We often think that climate change is far away. It's happening out there. And one of the things I've learned through this is that it's impacting mental health, particularly of young people. It started with my undergrad. I did an undergrad in psychology. And very quickly, as I did my practical, I realized that maybe the clinical aspect isn't for me. And I thought, let me give it a bit of a go in terms of research. I then went on to doing a master's in child and family studies. And that's where my interest largely in adolescence started, my work in adolescence. I started looking at goals and aspirations of adolescents in 1- and 2-parent households. And that project basically set the scene for the rest of my academic career. Some of my work has looked at parenting and the role of parenting in how young people make health decisions. A thing that's very unique to South Africa is that we have many single-parent households or households that are headed by grandparents, and I think that's unique to South Africa. And so we see the important role that these figures play in developing children and adolescents, which necessarily is not the case if we look at some of the studies abroad where we see the nuclear family that's headed by both a mother or father or by 2 parents of most probably the same gender as well. And so that in itself was a unique contribution. I think or the uniqueness of South Africa is that we find that there's lots of single parent households, but also households headed by grandparents as well. The research has focused largely on emerging adults, and looking at emerging adults has been a new spin-off. If I think of the work of Optentia, it speaks to looking at people across the life course, and where the specific focus for me has been on adolescence to emerging adulthood. Emerging adulthood is better preferred versus later adolescence, and the reason for this is that it's this transition phase. It's the experiences of young people in later adolescence is very different to early adolescence. And so because this is the next generation of leaders, and one of the issues that is impacting this next generation is climate change. Climate change is with us. We speak of, climate change is slowly approaching. Climate change is here. We see it in just our own experiences of where we had heat waves to localized flooding and storms happening simultaneously in 1 week in South Africa. And so it speaks to a pressing issue, something that's happening at this point in time. So the data told a very interesting story. It said that fear emerged as a result of climate change for young people. This fear was often as a result of ignoring the signs of climate change. And because of this fear that has emerged in terms of climate change, which we now term climate anxiety or eco-anxiety, actually led to a call for action among young people. And this call for action promoted behaviors that were pro-environmental in terms of their decision making. And that ultimately, I would say, is in summary the results. So 4 parts. The first part being fear emerging as a result of climate change. This has been shaped by ignoring the signs of climate change, but this fear has actually sparked this call for action among young people. And the fourth one being this call for action has led to a change in behavior, promoting pro-environmental behaviors and choices. So the study looked at the perceptions of emerging adults in terms of the impacts of climate change on health and well-being. And the particular method used was photovoice. So photovoice is where these young people would go out and take anywhere between 5 to 15 photographs of just daily events or things that they see in the environment of how climate change impacts their health and well-being. But this particular methodology allows you to engage well with the participants. It's richer data, they sharing their experience. And very often when we're engaging with young people, just saying that you come from a university, there's this fear and this perception that they need to perform in a certain way. But by asking young people just about their experiences and telling us about their photographs actually allows us to gain some insight into their understanding. They become co-creators of knowledge with us as researchers. And that's the one joy of using photovoice. It's a creative method. Um, it's easy for us to use. And we're able to engage from the perspective of the participant, just them sharing their own understandings of these images that they've taken. There was a particular approach that I used in terms of questioning, and I love to refer to it as conversation and not an interview. And the conversation was shaped by what we call the showed principle. And it basically asked about saying, tell us a bit about what you're seeing in this image. Why is this important at this particular time? What is it that we can do? And it's largely where young people or any of the participants who form part of using photovoice, they become co-creators of knowledge. And that ultimately, they are the true researchers at the end, informing lots of the work that we are doing. So what we've seen is not necessarily something that we will find a DSM criteria for. And so at this point in time, researchers speak of climate anxiety as any negative emotion that emerges as a result of environmental distress. And so that's what we're starting to see. We're seeing worry, stress and concern about the impact of climate change. There is threats to safety, and as I will be discussing on Thursday, there's one particular image that comes to mind that one of the participants spoke about, where because of the impact of climate change, it changed the environment, and there's this particular vehicle that's stuck in sand, which shouldn't have been there. And it created this stress and anxiety, and that's often the little impacts that we see playing out in the mental health of young people, but not necessarily only young people, all people as well in terms of that. So there isn't necessarily a DSM categorization for it, but we're seeing these impacts in terms of the impacts of climate change. You know, we often think that climate change is far away. It's happening out there. And one of the things I've learned through this is that it's impacting mental health, particularly of young people, where there are fear, distress as a result of climate change and the impact on their own safety. And this has been concerning because this would lead to a number of problems in terms of us to think proactively, how do we intervene in terms of policy and interventions. And so those were some of my concerns that have emerged. What is very exciting is that this has been the first time, or very few studies, I should say, has focused on climate change of young people, particularly in developing countries. We often see that research has happened in developed nations, and climate change actually impacts all of us. And so to understand climate change and the perspectives of persons from low and middle income countries, and a number of other factors that shape the experiences of climate change. That's really exciting for us to understand that, so that we can develop interventions and policies timelessly as well.